You've probably heard the line, "Houston, we have a problem, yeah?" That line became one of the most famous in movie and space history. But what if I told you the real story behind Apollo 13 was just as chaotic as the mission itself? From NASA engineers losing their minds to actors getting sick mid-air, this film went through its own version of a crisis and still came out as a masterpiece. Number 1. They actually filmed in zero gravity. Before CGI made space easy, Ron Howard decided to go old school and insane. He convinced NASA to let the cast and crew use the real Vomit Comet, a modified Boeing KC-135 that simulates zero gravity by diving in midair. Each parabolic arc gave them just 23 seconds of weightlessness. So imagine this: lights, cameras, actors, and sound gear all floating and crashing down in cycles for hours. They flew over 600 times to capture those floating scenes you see in the film. It was so effective that even NASA engineers admitted it looked eerily real. Because it was real. Number 2. The flight that made everyone sick. Now, it's not called the Vomit Comet for nothing. Tom Hanks, Bill Paxton, and Kevin Bacon quickly found out that zero gravity can make you nauseous faster than any roller coaster. By the third day, everyone had a bucket next to them. Paxton later joked that between the lights, turbulence, and constant dives, it felt like shooting a movie inside a washing machine. Still, Ron Howard refused to fake it. He wanted every dizzy, spinning, floating moment captured for real, and the pain shows beautifully on screen. Number 3. Tom Hanks basically became an astronaut. When Hanks signed on to play Commander Jim Lovell, he didn't just study the script, he studied NASA. He learned to operate every switch, practice real space procedures, and even memorized emergency checklists used on the actual Apollo 13 mission. Lovell himself said Hanks could have passed for one of his crew members. Even Hanks spent time in NASA's real simulators, performing mock missions until it all felt second nature. By the end, he wasn't pretending to be in space. He was living it. Number 4. Gary Sinise went full NASA too. Gary Sinise played Ken Mattingly, the astronaut grounded over a suspected illness, but who later helped save the mission from Earth. To play him accurately, Sinise spent weeks training in real flight simulators with NASA instructors. He learned the spacecraft systems inside out, so much so that he could walk technicians through a full power-down sequence by memory. One real astronaut later said, "If we ever needed a backup, Sinise could have handled it." That's how deeply the cast respected the real people behind the story. Number 5. Ed Harris stayed in character for the entire shoot. Playing flight director Gene Kranz, Ed Harris was dead serious. He wore the headset all day, even between takes, and issued mock Houston commands to keep the atmosphere real. Ron Howard said Harris practically became Kranz. He even insisted on using vintage NASA mission logos and jargon in his dialogue. And that steely, unshakable look on his face during the crisis scenes? That wasn't acting. Harris refused to drop character until the day they wrapped. Number 6. The real Gene Kranz's wife made the iconic vest. One of the coolest details in the film is Kranz's white vest, that crisp 1960s NASA look. But here's the twist: it wasn't a costume department creation. It was handmade by Gene Kranz's real wife, Marta, who used to sew all his vests during the Apollo era. She recreated it for Ed Harris herself, right down to the stitching and fabric. That vest became symbolic, a reminder that this was a film rooted in real people, not just Hollywood fantasy. Number 7. Bill Paxton filmed while sick, literally. You know those moments when Paxton's character looks sweaty, pale, and drained inside the spacecraft? That wasn't makeup. Paxton actually had the flu during filming, but Ron Howard decided not to stop production. Instead, he used it. The feverish fatigue added authenticity to the mission's tension as the crew struggled with limited oxygen and power. Paxton later said, "It was brutal, but it helped me feel the desperation we were supposed to be playing." Number 8. The set was so real it was unbearable. To keep things accurate, the production team built the command module to exact scale. Every switch, every dial, every tight inch. There was no air conditioning, barely any room to move, and the lighting made temperatures soar. Hanks once joked, "We didn't need acting, we were already losing oxygen." Ron Howard said he wanted the audience to feel the claustrophobia, and that meant the actors had to live it first. Number 9. The real Jim Lovell appears in the movie. In one of the coolest cameos in movie history, the real Jim Lovell appears as the Navy captain who greets the astronauts after splashdown. That's right, the real Apollo 13 commander welcomed himself home on screen. Ron Howard said it was a surreal moment. You had Tom Hanks playing Jim Lovell and the real Lovell shaking his hand. It felt like history meeting Hollywood. Lovell even advised Hanks on a few lines to make his portrayal more accurate. Number 10. NASA almost said no to the whole film. When Ron Howard first pitched Apollo 13, NASA wasn't exactly jumping out of its seats with excitement. The real mission had been a near disaster, a moment in history that reminded everyone how close space travel had come to tragedy. For years, NASA had treated Apollo 13 as the mission that almost failed. They celebrated the crew's survival, sure, but the agency wasn't eager to relive the fear, the public scrutiny, and the media headlines that came with it. At first, NASA politely declined. They didn't want a Hollywood version of their darkest hours. They'd seen what movies could do with creative freedom. But Ron Howard wasn't making a disaster movie. He told NASA this story wasn't about failure, it was about triumph through failure. By the end of the production, NASA realized something unexpected. This movie wasn't reopening old wounds, it was healing them. Apollo 13 turned a failure into one of NASA's proudest stories of human resilience, and that decision to say yes ended up reigniting America's love for space. Number 11. The famous line wasn't quite right. We all know the line. It's one of the most quoted phrases in movie history. Houston, we have a problem. But here's the twist. That's not what Jim Lovell actually said. During the real Apollo 13 mission, his exact words were, "Houston, we've had a problem." Past tense, short, calm, almost too calm for Hollywood. Ron Howard and his team decided to adjust it slightly. They made it a present tense, "We have a problem," to give it that punch of immediacy, that feeling of a moment unfolding in real time. It's a small change that made a huge difference. Number 12. Apollo 13 changed NASA's image forever. When the movie hit theaters in 1995, it reignited something powerful. People suddenly remembered what space meant: the risk, the courage, the teamwork. Schools started teaching the Apollo missions again, and planetariums saw their biggest crowds in years. NASA reported a surge in interest, not just from the public, but from students who wanted to become scientists and engineers. Even astronauts said it changed how people looked at their jobs. One veteran engineer said, "The film reminded everyone that our biggest successes often come from surviving failure." And get this, NASA actually used Apollo 13 clips during training to teach teamwork and crisis management. That's right, a Hollywood movie became a teaching tool at NASA. Thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments which fact is the weirdest. And don't forget to subscribe.